This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and my guest for today is Markus Bernhardt. He is the Chief Evangelist at OBRIZUM and is pioneering Deeptech AI digital learning solutions for all aspects of organizational and people development. Previously the CEO of 2 education institutions, and with years of experience in executive and non-executive board roles in the education sector, Markus uniquely combines a strong background in learning and cognitive science with a deep understanding of technology and artificial intelligence. In this future-driven conversation, Markus and I talk about what exactly is the definition of deep tech, and what is the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence. We then talk about how Markus believes AI will impact and change learning and cognitive science, and whether or not we need to consider ethics in artificial intelligence applications. We then move on to talk about some practical applications about what ways we might integrate tools like ChatGPT and other generative AI applications with a learning management system or other tools that are available for the education sector today. Then, because adaptation is the secret to success in learning experiences, we ask, how does Markus approach an unstructured learning environment? We then talk about what are the skills or capabilities that a tutor needs for creating a personalized journey experience for their clients. And then finally, we tie it together with asking, how is AI going to impact learning in the corporate space? And what is Markus's opinion for the near future of this technology? And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, I give you Markus Bernhardt. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the eLearn podcast. It is a balmy, I don't even know what, should I use Celsius or Fahrenheit? Now I just realized that I don't even know the audience I'm talking to here right now. But, it's a fantastic day here in the middle of January 2023, and I am very excited to have Markus Bernhardt on the show, whose name I so eloquently butchered in the green room before because I'm that guy. Anyway, Markus, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Ladek, and it's great to be here. We've had many previous good conversations about these topics, and it's cool finally to be live on show with you.
It is. I'm really excited to talk with you. And I couldn't be more excited because not only are you the guy, but it's like this is the topic of the moment, and so I'm really excited to talk about AI and how it's just going to destroy everything around learning as we know it. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we tell everyone who you are. So rather than having me butcher, your title, your company, and, all of your accolades, give us the 60 seconds on who you are, what you do today, and kind of what your focus is.
Awesome. Yeah. So my name is Markus Bernhardt. I'm the Chief Evangelist at OBRIZUM. We're a Cambridge, UK based technology company, and with our AI, we're revolutionizing how organizational development and learning is going to work now and in the future, utilizing the power of AI for personalized learning journeys, for building programs of learning, for managing content hubs and libraries. All of those things AI is really moving forward in. And so that's my role. I've been at the company for 2.5 years, and it's been an really exciting journey. And learning is my passion. I led 2 educational institutions in the UK myself previously, and my background is theoretical physics. and that's where I've also done a little bit of AI and know a thing or two also about how AI works.
Wow.
So I bring together the learning and the AI.
Not just physics, but theoretical physics, like the really hard stuff. I love that. That's fantastic. Get off the cuff question real quick. Does OBRIZUM mean anything in particular? Like, is there a reason behind that name? It's a word I've never heard before.
Yeah, OBRIZUM stems from the Latin word for pure gold. So gold is aurum, and pure gold is OBRIZUM, and you get from aurum to OBRIZUM by putting it repeatedly into fire and purifying it. And that process was called assessment. So the Romans used assessment to get from gold to pure gold. And so we thought, for a learning company, that's an ideal name, because when we're assessing in the process of learning, we know exactly where the learner is, what they already know well, and what they require. And so, yeah, it's a slightly awkward name, but it really makes sense.
But that's why I asked, because once you hear the thought process behind it, makes total sense, right? And I don't know, I think that's kind of a cool, it's a cool thing to know about a company, because there was actual thought behind the name and there's a reason behind it. I mean, if that isn't a cocktail networking conversation starter, I don't know what is.
Exactly. So, although I have to say, in the organizational development world, you very quickly find out whether you're talking to people with more of a science background who go, ooh, to other people who think, why is he telling us this? This is nothing to do with the learning process.
100%. Yeah. It's like, I teach English. Thank you. No. So the second question, for just sort of in your background, that I found interesting, and I'd like to make a distinction about it, is in your bio, you say that you do deep tech AI. So let's start our conversation in the place where every person in the world that you and I probably know, or, in my universe, is enamored with, fascinated by, terrified by ChatGPT. Like we see it in the news every day. It's changing everything. Is there a difference here? Does deep tech mean something else? Like it's embedded and you kind of don't notice it happening, or is that just a cool word that you get to use?
Deep tech is a cool word that says we're technologically at the edge, technologically. The problem with AI is that there's no proper agreed upon definition. And that also goes back to the fact that we have no proper agreed upon definition for intelligence. So intelligence is difficult to define. Even when you look beyond humans, when you look at a beehive, for example, you have a sort of intelligence there. So that's why we can't define intelligence. Therefore, to define artificial intelligence is particularly difficult. And the problem is also in the AI community, we tend to very quickly, in society and in the AI community, consider things that happened 5 years ago as normal computer programs, no longer cutting edge. Why would you call it AI? So there's the boundary tends to shift for what is really considered AI and how clever is it. And so with that, we're having to battle as a sector and as an industry, but also the general public, because they say, what is AI? And you have to start with, well, it's not well defined actually to start. But yeah, deep tech is one of those words that says we're doing proper development at the edge.
Right. Okay. Hi, I'm jumping into the conversation real quick to ask you a very simple, quick favor. If you are enjoying what you're listening to right now, if it's interesting, if it's entertaining, if you're pulling away value, if you're learning something, whatever the case may be, do me a favor and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. If it's on your phone, if you're listening on a computer, whatever it is, just take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe. It helps us. You'll never miss an episode, and everybody wins. And if you really like this content, a lot, come on over to eLearn Magazine, throw your email address in there, and subscribe there as well for other great content around our blog posts, around the events we play, and of course, this podcast as well. Thank you very much. And now back to the show. And so then following there is juxtapose AI versus machine learning. Are we talking about the same thing? Is that another way to describe what's happening here?
To some degree, yes. AI is understood to be the wider term. Everything where we're trying to get the engine, as I call it, because it's much easier to understand AI when you use the word engine. every time we're trying to get the engine to do something that we might call clever, we can coin that artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence goes back almost 100 years now. Not quite, but dates far back to was it 1962 or something? Dates far back, and we started with symbolic AI, which was very much mathematical, and then later on the neural networks come in, which sort of try to simulate a little bit how we understand the brain works with neurons and these firing. And when these neurons in different layers fire, we can use statistical processes to let them fire in the right way to achieve a certain outcome. And we know what the outcome is because we will have examples where we exactly know what we want, and that's how we train the system. So machine learning comes from the fact that we say, well, we know what the outcome is. We're going to get the neural network to try to understand what is happening here. And then we can apply that to examples that weren't in the training set. And therefore, machine learning is that subset. But there are natural language processing models, for example. There's symbolic AI. So AI is wider, but machine learning is probably a lot of the AI that we tend to come across. That was at least true until ChatGPT became the craze. And now everyone feels like they have something to do with AI. They can go and test it. But that's also going to be great for our sector because people feel much more comfortable with it now. They've tested something that is AI. They've played with it. They've seen that it can do some really cool stuff, even if you don't quite understand what's happening in the background. And so that's a really interesting development for the whole sector right now, and for all industries, including also us as private people. So yeah, very exciting times. 2023 is going to be a very interesting year.
100%. So then dispel the myth for me, if you dare, because as I said, I find myself someone who's been in technology 20 plus years, and I live and breathe this stuff. I'm not going to lie that there's a little bit of terror, as well as, if it's 90% fascination, there's definitely 10% of trepidation, especially because, wow, these things, like the example I've been using is not even ChatGPT. Like, there's so many people who are familiar with the service called Canva, right? Where you can go in and make graphics, right? And they just released their Magic Doc thing where, you put a couple prompts in there and boom, you got 4 paragraphs or whatever it is of text that, and it's just like, that is fascinating. Dispel that myth for me. So do we have a reason to say, as you said, we don't even have a definition for AI. Do we need to start thinking ethics and, moral implications or, boundaries in this way?
Well, look, the number one, it's an engine and it's a tool, and it's a tool that humans can use, and it makes us more powerful at what we do. But that also happened when Excel came along. It didn't quite happen when PowerPoint came along, because I always say talks got worse when PowerPoint came along. But it's a tool, and if we know how to use it, then that allows us to do things that we weren't able to do beforehand. And that's, we have the Siris and the Alexas and the Googles on our phones that help us with certain tasks. Sometimes we end up shouting at our phone because we don't quite get it to understand what we want. But those language models are now improving, and we can see that with ChatGPT. It really gets what you want, and you can even say, how do I need to interact with you to get an even better result? And it will explain to you what it needs in order to give you an even better result. So from that point of view, it's a tool. Ethics is always going to be big in AI. And it's an important topic, and I think AI is doing us a real service here, because we are questioning bias much more strongly than we used to. We know from research how biased human beings are, and therefore there are certain rules that we have now for HR and how we deal with certain issues of recruitment, etc. But we know how biased the human being is. And so to bring in AI and to say AI could also be biased allows us now to delve much deeper into how might AI be biased, but it also allows us to question much more how our decision-making processes are still biased. And so I think there's a big step forward there now, both for AI as well as for us, in terms of shining a light on where these biases lie, and being able to improve further as the human race in terms of reducing bias. And so I think that's a great thing. And from a technological point of view, we've got, of course, the EU AI Act, which is supposed to come out this year. And the EU AI Act is basically the GDPR for AI. What the EU has done with GDPR, if I may just very briefly, it's
just for everybody who doesn't know, before you dive down, the GDPR is a Data Protection Act.
It's the
that was passed in the European Union and whatnot. So just so everybody knows. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And the way they did this is that they said every company that has a seat in the EU has to abide by these rules worldwide. So that then made it the global standard. And so they're on the front foot. It's really good work that is happening there. And they're also addressing things like biases, ethical use of AI, challenging AI on how it makes its decisions, and that will further the research into those angles. So that's all brilliant, really good work. So that'll be a huge step forward. And so I'm confident that, you know, any discussion that is being brought up that questions the status quo, that questions what we're doing, is always going to be a good thing. And for ethical issues and biases, that's a brilliant thing. You know, we shouldn't pretend that we're humans and we've got this sorted and now the AI is coming in with biases. No, we know we're amongst the worst with our human minds, even if it's unconscious.
Mm. I want to thank Sean Adams for, you know, he kind of came in with a comment here over LinkedIn. He's, you know, he was just echoing you that with any game-changing technology, you know, there's going to be people who thrive and there's going to be people who don't. And, you know, it's really up to you if you want to figure out creative applications or be a naysayer. It's very interesting. I agree with him. Absolutely. So take me to the learning universe that you and I occupy. How do you see this? Let's start with the structured learning universe. How do you see, and what are you working on that, you know, takes us to sort of that standard, you know, here's the structured path that we're going to go down. And, you know, you need to get from not having skill A to having skill A.
Yeah.
Like, how is this, what do you foresee things changing and things being disrupted?
The real game changer here will be personalization and truly adaptive learning. And I mean, adaptive learning has been coined adaptive learning for many years. And there's been research by the Learning Guild, for example, that says people don't even know what adaptive learning means because there's so many different meanings out there for how I get recommended content. So I don't mean adaptive learning in terms of social recommendations. Ladek is on your team, Markus. He liked the Leadership 2 course. You might like it as well. That's called adaptive learning. I call that social recommendation.
Right. Yeah.
So truly adaptive learning means we get personalized journeys that adapt on the fly to what we already know and how we're progressing. And that's something that up to here we could only have when we had a personal tutor or a personal trainer. That's when we're dealing with one coach who's just looking at us. And right now we're the center of attention. And it's all about what do we already understand, what are we already able to do, and where do we need to get there? Where do we need to get, and how do we get there? And so that personalization journey is where AI will have by far the biggest impact, because when we look at the past in e-learning, and I'm not one of these people who like to just make out that e-learning in the past maybe hasn't been that good, especially in compliance. There were limitations in e-learning because of the technology, right? But e-learning in essence is giving someone the textbook. They then go through the slides on a one-size-fits-all journey. Everyone has to click through it, and we know all the issues with the next button we've experienced in the last decade. And then at the end, they might ask us 10 questions. If we get 7 right, then somehow we're now competent. And if we get less than 7 right, then we kind of have to loop back and we might have to see some more slides, and we can then get the questions again. And if it's a clever program, it might even change the order of the questions, or it might even change 2 or 3 of the questions. But that was the standard, and we were used to that because that was just what was possible. But at least that was scalable, and people were able asynchronously to go through material and to try to prove that they understand it. Now, with proper adaptive AI, AI-powered learning, we can now change the journey live in real time based on the feedback that we get from the learner, based on whether they're correct, based on what confidence they're implying they might have, and we can really personalize that journey. Which means that if you're already an expert and you have to recertify, you'll get the equivalent of, give me the test, I know what I'm doing.
Sure, yeah. Like, yeah, can we just skip to the end, please? Yeah, can we skip to the good part?
It'll just be basically the test for you, and then with far more questions than 10, it'll very quickly realize that you know what you're talking about, and there's your certificate. And I think this will have two effects, right? One is learning will become far more interesting. We'll be able to dive much deeper into things that we're interested in and consume learning and learn effectively. Key always to be in line with the cognitive science of multimedia learning. We have dual channel, and we need text and we need images. And so that is key. But all of this can be delivered with the help of AI, and we can learn very effectively as if we have a personal tutor. That's where I think AI will have the biggest impact by far. And then in addition to that, from these journeys, we can gain lots of learner data and insights into how the learner is progressing, where they're finding things difficult, what pieces of content are working best when you start looking at large numbers of learners, which examples don't work so well, which examples work really well. There's the data element. And then, of course, we're seeing AI can organize now also and contextualize large, vast amounts of data and content. So we know in the future, we won't have to tag anymore by hand and sort things by hand. So that's another huge step forward where that will be made easier. So those are the three areas where I see by far the biggest impact. Fully adaptive learning journeys, the data that comes out of that we can then utilize to get the next generation to learn even better, either with the content or with the AI learning as it works with each learner, even better how it works in that learning space. And then of course the contextualization and the mapping engines that help us build larger pathways or draw together content from a learning library or from a knowledge hub to produce new learning journeys and curate new journeys. Those are the three biggest areas. And then obviously you've already mentioned it, and I've also mentioned it. ChatGPT will be there, but I see that more in workflow as a lookup function, right? So if I'm working on something and I have a quick question, for example, how does this function work in Excel? These systems will be unbelievably good to supply me with an answer very quickly and very efficiently. But one of the limitations already of the ChatGPT is, of course, we're still not there that the system can work with visuals. And even if it could present them, it can't look at visuals and understand them and know when to show the right picture. And that's why, for example, learning designers will utilize AI to create better and more adaptive learning journeys, but we will still need instructional designers to create good, effective learning. But that would be the broad brush overview.
There's nothing broad about that. That was fantastic. Excellent. I want to throw the question that came in from Senem, whose family name is Saruglu. I'm sorry. I apologize if I completely butchered that, which I'm sure I have. But she's asked, how do you think that we can integrate ChatGPT with a learning management system? Because it sounds like as we think about structured learning, you just described ChatGPT kind of almost as something that's going to be on a side panel that you could use to kind of drip in and out. Is that how you see that interface happening, or is there something different?
I see that interface happening more with content as such. It's a fantastic communication engine, and we're seeing how good it is. The problem is every communication engine is only as good as the knowledge engine that sits behind it. And a fantastic example, reports came out mid-December. Fantastic example that I've mentioned quite a few times now in the last few weeks is Stanford University have their PubMed GPT. So they taught the GPT model all of PubMed. And I mean, that is a knowledge.
For anybody who doesn't know, what is PubMed? Mike, I don't know.
Medical publications.
Okay. All right.
And that is a knowledge base for medical research that is unbelievably well vetted and tried and tested and verified. So that as a base is brilliant. And therefore they're celebrating huge successes with that as a tool where you can just dive in and quickly ask some questions. And of course, you're dealing with ChatGPT, who's read it all and can feed back some of the answers, can say, you might want to look here, you might want to look there. So that's unbelievably good. As a communication engine, that might also work really well for customer service, right? Instead of being on a phone for ages and then having an automated system that is trying to figure out what you're trying to do, and then it says, oh, I don't understand, I'm going to pass you on to a human. These systems will become, of course, far better. And so there I see it with a knowledge base as a lookup learning. Look up stuff that you need right now. Go through resources that your organization has generally, whether it's about a product, whether it's about services, whether it's you're a new joiner and you want to know how do I book holidays here? How do I book meeting room 3B? Those things, it'll be absolutely brilliant because the knowledge base is there and we can deliver that. To integrate it with an LMS, that bit I'm still not quite convinced, because I don't want to interact with it as a chat program that then tells me what's in the LMS. If I'm going to go into the LMS, if I want to put myself into a learning environment, then I have a clear goal of a self-development journey that I've either decided for myself or I agreed that with my line manager. And then we're talking about real learning. And that has to be structured learning. That has to be effective, efficient learning,
measured
spaced
outcomes,
out, practice, repetition, all those good things that make it stick. And for those, I would want every piece to be designed by a learning designer and by an ID. And therefore, there I don't quite see that integration as so useful yet. Whereas non-communication engines can help us manage the knowledge hub, the LMS. And so that I see more as the AI function for LMSs, because up to here, we've been totally used to that in a computer we need file structures, and if the file structures are good, then we can find what we want.
Right.
And that is now going to become the old-fashioned way of thinking, because all that time we spent trying to sort it and put it in the right place, to then when we need something to remember which folder structure that now is that I need to follow to get to that point. And hopefully I've created in such a way that in the moment of need, my own folder structure works for me. Then I will find the right thing. But with contextualization engines, we can now put all the files on a big pile. And we have the best librarian ever who is super fast. And we can just say to them, fetch me the videos we've got on topic A. Fetch me all the policies we've got on how to book meeting room 3B, and all of that I'll get in a millisecond displayed back on the screen. So those kind of things super useful, because they will help us manage the content and sort the content. And if you suddenly have a different framework and you say, oh, let's sort the LMS in a different way because we've got updated frameworks or whatsoever, no work for the humans who work in the department. You just resort it, and a few seconds, in the worst case, minutes later, it's all resorted. If you like it, you keep it that way. If you don't like it, you resort it back to the old way. The agility we have to engage with and find and retrieve files that we're interested in, and data and sources, that's so much more agile in the future, that all this structuring and tagging won't happen anymore and won't be required to happen. And that's also really good news, because no one has ever said, oh, 2 years ago we tagged this exactly the way we need it today.
That's, yes, 100%. As you were describing it, I want to just throw out there for a visualization for so many people who might listen to this is, the structuring of emails or files or whatever, that was I believe, to correct me wrong, the premise of just having the archive button on, like, for instance, Gmail, right? Where there's no folders. I mean, you can tag things, but really they're just like, look, just put it there and we'll find it for you later, right? Take me down this path. Is this now the answer to that age old question in, especially in a large company, a large university, whatever, wherever you're at, where so much knowledge is trapped in, like the person who's been there for 15 years. It's trapped in their head, or it's trapped in their personal files, it's trapped in like the interactions they've had. Does this take us that next step to extracting that and making it useful to others? Or is that still, that's like the next level?
I think both, and I think you're absolutely right. It'll help us extract information and bring it together and deliver it to us, and we can ask even to have it in a certain format or in a certain style. And the nice thing is there that AI can help us sort things and tag things and make them accessible. But if we then utilize also language models like GPT, then it also no longer matters too much how we phrased our question, right?
Because it can interpret the question, right?
Exactly. The language.
I'm trying to like that. I think that's the piece right there. Is that ChatGPT it interprets as not just, it doesn't just take the question and say, hey, can I link it to certain keywords? This is an actual interpretation.
Exactly. And imagine you've just got from your bank your mortgage documents to sign. Imagine you can upload that on ChatGPT and say, Is there anything in here that I should be worried about?
Sure. What did they sneak in here?
What happens when this happens if I sign this contract? What happens if this happens to exchange rates? What happens if this to interest rates? And without having to understand the technical speak, where it doesn't matter how well educated you are, sometimes you read these and you feel very dumb after 3 sentences, and you think, I'm not getting this. What do they mean? And I don't even get this general. Now, how am I supposed to get the caveats if I didn't really get the general information?
Yeah.
But with a language model, that can be translated into very simple summary saying, no, Marcus, if that's the situation, then with the contract you've just given me, you would be in this situation and this would happen. And then, so that I think is a really good example for the accessibility of information going forward, where I think this will be a really useful tool for everyone generally. If you then think about we're trying to retrieve something bigger from a system, then that is also a very nice example that shows that it doesn't matter what language you used or what language the contract or the document uses, because the language model realizes there are different words, they can mean similar or the same things. And so it will get what you mean. And if it doesn't get what you mean, we've already seen this also, it'll ask. And then you will be able to clarify what you meant, and that will help. But like I said, for learning, it still falls far short, both with the knowledge engine behind it, in terms of the knowledge engines we have for the development programs that we want to offer for our employees, or also in education. Those have to develop, and it lacks being anything other than just text at the moment, right? So that's where the ChatGPT is good, and I love the hype. It's a huge step forward. It's unbelievable that we're able to test this freely available zero-cost version live right now. That's unbelievably powerful, and we should get excited. But we should also know its limitations. We know it still makes mistakes. We know it's been broadly trained on the internet, and we know that there are areas there that aren't maybe verified or speak the way we would expect. And so there's outdated myths in there that get quoted, like learning styles. All of these things in the knowledge engine aren't quite verified yet. And so, yes, hype, absolutely justified. Caution in terms of where can I utilize it and where will it be useful. There's obviously great examples out there for where it's already useful. But when we now look at learning specifically, that's where we still have to focus on that the content has been properly designed for the learner in the right setting and for the performance/task that we're meant to be doing, right? We often forget in learning that it's not information delivery that then changes behavior. It has to be meaningful learning with images, with text, dual channel. We have limited processing as humans. So if we want to learn well, then we have to be stimulated in both channels. It has to be information that can be kept in working memory while we connect it to existing experiences. And then ideally, we have to be tested in the realm or close to the realm where we're supposed to utilize those tasks, because there's still a difference between pure recall and retention and applying the newly learned skill to something. So that's where proper learning is required when I'm thinking about upskilling, reskilling, personal development. I won't be able to do that with a pure text chat engine.
100%. So it almost sounds like, as you were describing just now, and also as you were describing how that structured learning might play out, very rapidly here in the very near future, it sounded to me like it bled over into essentially an unstructured learning environment, because you said, look, it could, if you show up as an expert, it's going to give you one scenario rather than somebody who's not. Or let's just say that you're going down the path and pick any skill, you're learning how to fix an engine, but then it's recognizing, it's like, wait a second, you're actually much better at this task over here. Maybe we should direct you this way and build these skills instead. Have I just completely jumped the shark and that's not a thing? And so take me there in terms of unstructured learning. Like it's recognizing something's interesting, or I say, hey, wait a second, I had a goal in mind, but I'm really discovering something else is where I want to go. Give me your thoughts on that.
That's a great thought process, and it's very visionary. So if we take
somebody hire me immediately.
if we take what we've talked about, then we can build fully adaptive learning journeys in adaptive spaces, and that's absolutely fantastic. And if you're an expert, you get just the test. If you need support in certain areas, that's where it slows down and gives you the support, but it tries to get you to the finish line as efficiently as possible, ensuring you've really learned what you wanted to learn. So that is if we apply it to something that in the past we may have called a module or a chapter. Mm-hmm. If we now open this space up and we say, wait a second, we could in theory fill it with a lot of things, and we could see how all these things that we've put in are connected or not connected to one another. We could discover how they stack up hierarchically. So certain things in maths you can only learn when you've learned the prerequisites, right? Or in language learning, those are always two really good examples where you can't just skip 3 chapters because you're now missing some essence to understand that chapter. So hierarchy is key. If for example, we took, let's just as a silly example, take all high school subjects and all high school curricula, we could upload them all. We could see exactly how they're related. We might even see that it's much better to teach certain aspects of physics with geography and so on and so forth, because the interconnections are no longer stopping us, because no one would say, no, you're in a physics lesson, you can't now have a page on geography.
Let me just jump in for a second, because I have to say, like, as soon as you went down this path, before you even got to the high school, I'm thinking of my 14-year-old. I'm like, is he going to roll into an environment in his case, will probably higher education, right? Yeah. So a university where it's like, hey, just, kind of come in and we're going to put you on, the visualization is like, on not a treadmill, but like a moving sidewalk where, okay, you start doing things and we're going to recognize what you're good at, what you're not good at, like how things interconnect for you. And we're actually going to start molding the degree or the certification or whatever to your, exactly. What you do best.
Exactly. Well, I would caveat what you do best.
I'm completely making up the future here, but like that was the visualization in my head.
You're absolutely right. And I could just go through the wider curriculum and let it take me and explore myself. And it could show me that I have certain strengths in certain areas and what those are related to, without confining it to a specific subject. Like it has to be physics, or it has to be biology, or it has to be chemistry. No, there are interplays between the sciences. And if I have a certain interest and I'm pretty good at something very specific, then what surrounds that is probably also going to be of interest to me. So what you're describing there, absolutely spot on. The only caveat I would have is that an essential part of education is also to show us things that we didn't know existed. We didn't know that they were interesting. And maybe even to keep us there longer than we wanted.
Sure.
Because
and
sometimes
it's and this is the educator's job to break the confirmation bias, to
exactly.
break us out of the shells, to say, hey,
Yeah.
wait, you didn't even know that you could discover this.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to push you in that direction because I know, I can see it. You don't want to do this scale for the 10th time, but guess what? I know. So this takes me to my next question. Over the last month,
Yeah.
and quite, if I'm frank, it's over the last week. There's one thing that has been kind of going through my head over and over again. And are you familiar with the movie Good Will Hunting?
Yes.
There is a scene in this movie where Robin Williams is thinking about the character of whatever the guy's name is. I can't remember his name. The main character, Goodwill, Will Hunting. And he's like, he's consternated about him, this and that. And then there's this great scene in the office. He's like, you know what? He's like, I was thinking about you, and you can come in here and you can tell me about this and that. And, you've read all these books. And he's like, then I just realized one thing, that you've never actually seen it. You've never actually experienced it. He's like, then I forgot it. And then I forgot about you and I went to sleep. And that was the scene, right?
Yeah.
Is this now the new value add for employers, for students, for everything, where it's just like, look, hey, that's great, but I can show you that I actually have the experience? Because in learning, that is the apprenticeship mentor model that it comes from, way back in the day, where it's like, I'm going to take you somewhere where you don't know where to go because I've been there, I've done it, I've seen it. This is how you tie the rope on the boat, that kind of thing. Or do I have that completely wrong?
Well, you're touching on two things there. One is to explore areas that are interesting, that are new, and I could go down that route if I had such an intelligent tutoring system and I could learn fully adaptively anything I would like to learn. Long-term vision. What you're also touching upon is having proven my capabilities. And that, of course, comes with testing. And interesting also in recent weeks that we've talked a lot about testing and how should we be verifying our skills. And that is a super interesting topic, because for me, on the one hand, it's a really exciting subject, and on the other hand, it's unbelievably bland. Why? Why? Because,
well, it's not, but and a lot of things are, they are, zero sum. They're yes, no. Okay, yeah, you do know that or you don't. But then there's so much that we try to learn that is this gray, right?
Well, let me get to the point, which is,
I apologize. I'm too excited.
The thing is, we're suddenly pretending that plagiarism has just become a thing because of ChatGPT. We've had tools for decades where we can check whether it's plagiarized off the internet, and 99.9% of institution and people have not used it. And they have just believed whatever someone has submitted and have said, that's it. There we go. They wrote this. So yes, university admissions are one of the few who will have always run everything through the plagiarism thing. But we've been plagued by this problem for many, many decades on the internet, that people can just go and copy something. And now that ChatGPT would allow us also to plagiarize it, we're saying, oh, now plagiarism is a huge problem. No, it's been a problem for ages. And that's what I mean by it's an interesting and very bland thing at the same time. We should have questioned this much earlier, how we let people submit essays.
Sure.
Checking where they got them from and questioning what they're actually proving. And what I'm saying is, what we're going to have to learn is do more of what we've also already been doing. So again, really exciting or bland, depending on which side you're on. In maths, we've always given you a problem, and if you could solve it, we said that helped, that works. In music, we've always said go away, come back and play the piece to the standard. Then we'll give you the certificate. And even in dentistry, after a lot of theory, you have to show that you can do a crown procedure. Otherwise, they let you nowhere near anyone. And and so we've done this in so many areas really well for so long. Yes, there are some subjects that have relied heavily, despite the possibility of plagiarism, on essays and writing, and that's where we're going to have to rethink. But there are other areas who are just shrugging their shoulders, saying, well, we've never tested you in maths by letting you go away, write 10 pages, and then say, well, there we go, he now knows what he's talking about. So it's new, but it's not new. It depends on which subject, which area, which sector you're in. And some sectors are really going to have to pull up their pants and get to work and say we can't keep doing this because we'll just be handing certificates to people who've been using the bot, and there are others who are saying, well, we don't even have this problem. So
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that answer so much, because now that you've defined it in that way, the real problems that we've been having around the world over the last 4, 5, 6 years around the war of information, right? The war of ideas is extraordinarily different than, any sort of question we'd have about, hey, can you actually fix that airplane engine or not? Right? Yes. Like you either can or cannot. There's no question about whether you can or cannot. But Correct. When we're talking about cultural ideas, identification, these which are really sort of these theoretical ideas and political ideas and those kinds. Yeah. That's a really interesting distinction. I'm really glad that you put that on the table there.
And then when we're looking at fully adaptive learning, where we're traversing a network of knowledge, as we sometimes call it, where the network is the different topic areas and the traversing is the learning journey, and I'm on my own personal journey. Well, if that network is covered in questions or tasks, it can be anything from a text question to even a 360 video experience, right? We're talking of course, we're already talking metaverse and all these things, and yes, that's still a little bit out. We're not quite there yet. But if we're thinking future, we'll be traversing these networks and we'll be proving our skill and our capability wherever at least it's possible in that environment. We'll be able to prove that, and we'll be able to certify. So we will be able to measure much more precisely what someone knows and what they're capable of, as long as it's something that lends itself also to a virtual space, but with virtual reality. Even that is expanding now. I would still hope that the dentistry student who comes and looks after me has done a proper test and exam somewhere in a real world scenario. That's just my hope for my treatment. But for many areas, this will just revolutionize how scalable the training and learning is, and how well we'll measure what the strengths and weaknesses are. And I'm not just meaning that in terms of testing and measuring in a negative fashion. What I'm also seeing there is the self-awareness angle. When you have a good personal tutor that's teaching a musical instrument or a subject, or a personal trainer in sports, what you really value and what you engage in is exactly where you stand. A lot of the conversation with that tutor or trainer is about where are we trying to get to? How do we look right now? What progress have we made? And too often in learning are we still in institutions like universities faced with reading the textbook. And then somewhere at the end you go to an exam. Are you ready for the exam? Well, I feel pretty good about the textbook, and I've done a few practice questions, and there were a few papers, and I did all right on those. But no, I have no good gut feeling of how good I actually am, where my strengths are, where my weaknesses are. If I'm doing a fully adaptive learning program, traversing a network of knowledge, and I'm properly being measured, then the feedback helps me. It helps me understand where my strengths and where my weaknesses are, why I'm working on certain things right now.
It almost sounds like this could have the opportunity to remove high stakes moments in learning, in that rather than because ultimately what you've just described is, hey, I'm going to start at the beginning of the semester. Yeah. 4 or 5 months later, I get to the final exam, and that's a high stake moment, right? Because you either did it or didn't, and you've either absorbed it or had, and you can either put the solution on the tables in the right way or not. Whereas, as you described with a tutor mentor, it's this constant flow of, little check marks along the way, kind of growing. And then when you get to that final moment, you get to that capstone where it's like, okay, grasshopper, I'm finally, show me, and then you're kind of blessed and you can go do it, right? Does that sound right to you?
Absolutely. And what you're touching upon there is that the whole learning journey should also be part of the assessment in an ideal world. And with a one-to-one tutor, it is. If you decide I'm gonna learn French, then with your French tutor, you know exactly at what level you are. It doesn't matter in tomorrow's test whether you have a good day or a bad day.
Yeah, sure.
High stakes. With your tutor, you know roughly exactly where you are, and he knows the strengths and weaknesses, and he communicates those to you. In education, it's like you say, it's all very much a high stakes moment at the end. And also in organizational development, we have our short tests at the end. And that will also change, that every moment in the learning will be part of the progress to the certificate, not because I've seen content, but because non-stop I'm also answering questions. I'm being put to the test. I have recall questions. I might even have transfer tests, depending on what environment I'm supposed to apply these skills in. And so all of those moments, suddenly, I'm no longer saying, oh, today I'm just reading and the test is still 2 months away. No, in this system, every moment will be actual progress, actual practice, and recorded for my certificate. So it will completely revolutionize what today I'm sitting down and I'm learning something and I'm working on something means. Something that we've been very used to when you learn an instrument, for example, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or in sports. There we consider that completely normal. No one thinks they're just theoretically learning their sport, and then in 2 weeks
try to play the game.
have a match, that's when they're being tested. No, every moment is the sport, right?
Right, absolutely.
And it should be the same when we're learning.
Oh, wow. I as with all these conversations, I cannot believe how quickly an hour has almost gone by. But I have one, I'd like to kind of tie this in about for the topic we're in, is like, how is AI going to impact learning? Tell me how this is going to change structures around higher ed and its interface with bringing graduates into the corporate space. And, do you see a different path about how we move into the professional world and then how we continue to upskill and grow in those things over time? Or is that still TBD?
In the corporate space, it will have a huge impact because we can deliver programs of learning for performance improvement. Remember, it's in the corporate world, we're not talking just learning for the sake of learning. We have an outcome in mind. We want to be able to perform a certain task or perform well in a given situation. For those things, learning journeys will be able to be delivered much more quickly. When the need arises, the learner can then dive in and consume them far more efficiently, and then it's back to the job. So in the organizational development of onboarding, reskilling, upskilling, certification, career journeys sideways.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things happen. For all of that will be unbelievably well set. If we now look further to the starting point and we look at education and higher education, then I think we have to be very careful when we get to an age group at the youngest end, where we have to say, no, education is not knowledge. Education is not just skill. Education is also social and moral development, and so there the classroom and the teacher has an absolutely clear task. What can happen along the side then, as students get older, there's no reason an 8th grader shouldn't be working on grade 11 maths if they can. They need to be with 8th graders because that's their social development, and they'll look silly amongst the older kids.
Sure.
But if they can cope with much more difficult maths, they should be doing it, but they need to be in their social group. So I think there's an area of education where I think it will have in the early years very little impact. Then as we near high school, it might have an impact, and we can support students far better. Imagine having your own personal tutor while you're doing homework. Instead of answering the 10 questions that the teacher gave everyone, you're answering the 10 questions that are the most effective for you to continue to hone your skills. Your music teacher would never give the whole class a piece. They say, Ladek, you're working on this one over the weekend. And they will say, and Markus is nowhere near. Markus needs to go through the scales again. And so that will happen alongside the teaching. So the homework will be far more effective. The homework can't be far too hard or far too easy for anyone, because the system will help gauge where someone is. And then if they're spending 10 minutes, they're spending 10 effective minutes. Huge impact. And then you mentioned the big problem area, which is how do we link that via university to the corporate world? Well, the universities aren't and don't see themselves as the feeder for the corporate world, although that is how society uses them. And the universities, that for me personally is the biggest problem in education, is that they're unwilling to move with entry requirements, which means K-12 can't change. because if you in 12 years have to end up in a certain point in order to be able to go and do a degree, then there's not much movement now how to revolutionize K-12, because we have 12 years and we have to get to that point that universities require. Even if we educated people unbelievably well, if universities say you can't join because you haven't got the right certificates, then that's of no use to anyone. So they hold the key for allowing K-12 to change. And then, of course, universities will also need to change in the way that they work, in the way that we see university as a stepping stone on the journey to the corporate world or not.
Right.
I mean, universities may become far more research focused and have far less to do with educating people for work. Possibly a good choice, because they weren't designed to educate people for work in the first place.
Right.
Unless you're studying dentistry and you want to be a dentist, that's very closely related. But with a history degree, unless you want to be a historian, you haven't been prepared for work, right? So we have to decide for universities, what's the entry requirement? Where will we allow people to come from? That will allow K-12 to change. But what you're opening there is a huge topic in terms of headache. And for me, the key holders are the universities. They need to decide how they fit into society and what their main aim will be to support students on their journey and what that journey is. We can do a lot of now in the future. Corporate development, getting people ready for the workplace, giving them the right skills. A lot of that will be able to happen with not going to university at all, because there will be asynchronous programs online where I can do fully adaptive learning journeys. So yeah, a bit of a philosophical question, but as you can see, one that
I love it, because it's,
I do find exciting.
Yeah, well, and as someone with a teenage son and two others that are going to follow very soon, they're going to be entering into that menage, right? Like I'm personally fascinated by it. I'm not terrified. I'm fascinated by seeing how that continues to play out, especially since we saw, higher ed come out of the pandemic with a very interesting agenda of needs that it needs to change and fill and adapt to, et cetera. This is just another set of those needs and whatnot.
Yeah. And
I think go ahead.
Corporate world tends to very often show the way. So if in organizational development, we showcase how systems work, and the corporate world tends to also have more money to invest in innovation. Right? So education often comes last, because it has to have been tried and tested. We're not going to give it to the next generation and try it on them. So there is a case to say, well, corporates are looking for innovation to keep making their money and staying ahead of the game in the competitive field. So I think those organizations will really give us an idea of how fast adaptive learning and AI in learning will scale, how well it's received, how big the impact is. And then from there on, we'll see an effect that it also shifts into higher ed and further education.
Fantastic. Markus Bernhardt, this has been a fascinating and fantastic conversation. I'm remiss that we have to end it here, but let's have you back on the show so that we can continue it. Maybe 6 months from now, when we see how ChatGPT continues to play out over 2023.
Absolutely. With everyone interested now in the topic, happy to come back on. Always enjoy a good chat with you, Ladek. Really enjoyed this. Thank you very much indeed.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast. I just wanted to take one last moment here to ask you to, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, if you had fun, if you liked the guest, if you wanted to learn more, if you feel like sharing this with somebody, do me a favor. Hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. Just do it right now before the episode ends. Hit subscribe, and that way you'll never miss an episode as we publish them every week. Thanks.